I work with an organisation called Education International, and I've just finished with them. I did my last project with them in March. Um, it is the global organisation for teacher unions, but my job over 15 years and longer than that actually was liaise with the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. Now, I'm very pro the OECD, but I don't want to ruck about whether the OECD is a pit of capitalism or whether it's a progressive force. So that's one of those debates we can have outside. What they do have, particularly in the Education and Skills Directorate, is a research engine to die for. And if you have a look at PISA and TALIS and Education at a Glance and those big jobs, they really are enormously, rigorously pored over, not only by representatives of countries, but also by a huge army of academics as well who crawl over and see what's valid and reliable. Now, that's where I come from. And what I wanted to focus on in this series, is the international comparisons of school inspection or evaluation systems. Now, in other countries, they don't generally talk about inspection; they talk about evaluation, and that's a generic term. And I want to do a bit of brush clearing first. As far as I know, and Peter may and other academics here may blow me out of the water on this, but Synergies for Better Learning, an international perspective on evaluation and assessment, published by the OECD in 2013, is the mother of all comparative international research on evaluation systems. And we had a conversation about this, Peter, actually. I know you went to it. It's an enormous tome. It's 670 pages and it's weighing down my bookshelf at home. I did go back to it. And actually, again, I want to thank John because it allowed me to actually go back down memory lane to have a look at all these things. And I found it immensely revealing, actually. To start off with, the important thing is that there's a taxonomy of evaluation, and there are 5 sets of evaluation: student evaluation, teacher evaluation, school leader evaluation, school and institution evaluation, and education system evaluation. And it's important to have those 5 types in your head because the OECD have very, very strong views about those, the way in which those types of evaluation relate to each other. I want to pick out common themes very quickly before I get on to what I want to say about alternatives. And I found the conversation very, very inspiring this morning and really got me focused even more. First of all, the 2013 study is equally as relevant today as it was in 2013. Not much has changed at all since 2013. I was on the working group with the OECD putting it together. So what did they find in their themes in relation to evaluation? There's an increased governmental demand for educational effectiveness, equity and quality to meet economic and social demands, number 1. There's a trend to greater school autonomy, number 2. Jurisdictions are exploring greater opportunities for digital assessment, i.e. customised student assessment. And there's a greater reliance on evaluation results for policy decision-making. And their broad conclusions of the OECD are these: that education is expanding and becoming more diverse. Indicators are becoming more important, including national databases and institutional comparisons. And there's an expansion in the use of indicators, including school league tables. And there's a rising reliance on national education standard. What I didn't mention at the beginning was how many countries did take part. The US did take part, actually, so did Canada, but Singapore didn't take part, which is, there's an interesting codicil to that. I always take the term countries with a pinch of salt because there are a number of countries where regions or provinces actually act as proxy for the whole country when it comes to an evaluation. You take Canada, it's usually Ontario and British Columbia are up there as proxy for Canada when they're doing evaluation, not the whole of Canada, because the education system is entirely devolved in Canada. And so it is in the UK. And it's always driven me mad that somehow the ministers of the four nations of the UK never talk to each other. In fact, actually, Starmer did posit the idea of a council of ministers, if you remember, right at the beginning of the of last year when they came into power. And my argument is that actually a council of education ministers for the UK is as vital here as it is in Canada or in Germany, and that ought to be put together. So go back to what I was going to say. Oh, by the way, Belgium's a classic. They have three entirely separate provinces, and they talk to each other as well. So the main messages from the OECD is this: jurisdictions must take a holistic approach to evaluation, and that means if you are going to have school evaluation, you have to know what student evaluation and teacher evaluation and school leader evaluation is for, and how that all locks into each other. And it's a massive criticism of the UK that there is no overall concept of what evaluation and assessment is. It is a real fault in the system, actually. All the bits happen all over the place and don't really connect with each other. They should know what their main goals are for, which is what you were saying, and Wales, and have a coherent approach to all forms of assessment. That is the conclusion of the OECD. Evaluation and assessment should align with educational needs. Well, absolutely. Evaluation should focus on improving classroom practice. Remember, this is the OECD saying this. Really powerful stuff, actually. Distortion should be avoided by creating conditions would lead to teaching to the test. Not my words, the OECD's. The well-being and confidence of students should be put at the centre of evaluation policies. The top priority must be that evaluation supports students being fully engaged in learning. So evaluation has to support learning. There should be an equal focus on developing critical thinking, social competencies, engagement with learning, and overall well-being. An equal focus on that, and not just on the core academic subjects. Performance measures must be broad, not narrow. Capacity should be built at all levels, and there's an example they give, which is focusing on enabling teachers to carry out formative assessment. That's an example of capacity building. Evaluation should equally take into account local needs. And finally, evaluation can only be designed, this is real killer, this one actually. Evaluation can only be designed successfully by building consensus amongst all stakeholders. Remember, this is the OECD, this is the government's own organisation saying this. I'm going to say just a little bit, actually, because I do have a little criticism. There's only one Secretary of State who understood the importance, as far as I'm concerned, in the last 30 years, the importance of international evidence and learning, and that was Blunkett. I have a lot of time for Blunkett, actually. I think he was a really fantastic Secretary of State, because apart from anything else, he did standards, not structures, and he focused on the quality of learning, whatever you thought of how he did it. Where is the OECD on school institutional evaluation? Right, this is very interesting, actually. Now, you're looking at 25 participating countries, which include a number of jurisdictions, which is higher than that. Now, the evidence is that just over half of participating countries had just over half, something like, well, I don't know, I think it was 53% to 47% had national evaluation systems, and just under half had local or regional requirements for school evaluation. So just under half of the countries did not have national requirements for school evaluation. And as I say, we need to take this evidence with a pinch of salt, because, you know, the UK has 4 jurisdictions and 3 in Belgium, for example. But Canada, Germany, and Spain couldn't have national requirements, even if they wanted to, since their jurisdictions are devolved. And there's a very interesting pointer when you analyse who has national evaluation systems or regional education systems. And that is, it makes no difference whatsoever to what is deemed to be a high-performing country. So, for example, Canada, Japan, and Korea, all deemed by the OECD to be high-performing countries, have no national requirements for external evaluation, whereas Estonia, Ireland, and Poland have national requirements. So the idea that you have to have an evaluation system is for the birds. If you think it's integral to raising standards, it's not, because there's lots of evidence that other things are in play, as Canada, Japan, and Korea demonstrate. So, key points. There are often conflicting trends in most countries. The first is attempting to use evaluation to assess school effectiveness and create accountability. That's the first trend. The second is using evaluation to help school improve development. Now, everything that I have got from the OECD and the countries that we studied is that most countries recognise the conflict between the two and do their best to try and ameliorate the impact of accountability and evaluation on school improvement. And there's another thing, and that is, and this is really, really interesting, most countries pay a very, very high or put a very, very high emphasis on the importance of school self-evaluation. Most countries do that. And I'll come back to that in a bit. But in fact, actually 2/3 of countries in the study have local and national requirements for schools to conduct self-evaluation. So self-evaluation is big. So you're going to have to let me digress a little bit and go down memory lane. In 1994, the NUT commissioned a report on school self-evaluation called Schools Speak for Themselves, and some of you may remember it. And I was talking with Michael, and actually the first primary school that went into special measures was a real scandal. It was Crook Primary in Durham, County Durham, to the extent that there were TV gantries poking their cameras over the wall to actually look inside the school, for example, and a posse of photographers outside, and the kids were scared they were going to be taken away from their parents. It was that bad. And we felt in the NUT that we had to come up with an alternative model. So we knew about John and his work, John Macbeth and his work at Strathclyde University. And we asked him to analyse Scotland's approach to linking school development planning with the impact of school development plans on improvement, with the intention of using the evidence as a basis for creating an alternative to the then newly formed Ofsted. Now, it was a very powerful report, and I remember Eric Forth chasing John around the bloody Tory party conference, shouting at him about how awful the report was. But it really did get picked up by Blunkett, actually, which is very, very important. He was very, very interested in the school self-evaluation report and alternative models. And it also led to a European Union funded project in 18 countries, which explored the potential for school self-evaluation. So there were three academics, John Macbeth, Dennis Murray, and Michel Schratz, who put together a book called European Trends in School Self-Evaluation. And there were two international conferences in Luxembourg and Vienna, which the British government sponsored along with other countries. And I was there actually as a government delegate. One of the few times that I was there as a government delegate, I was there at one of these conferences. And it was extraordinary. And the buzz about school self-evaluation was extraordinary at those conferences. Now, crucially, this project had a major influence on the OECD and Andrew Schleicher at the point when its education directorate was about to go above the radar as a major educational force internationally with the publication of the first programme for international student assessment. At exactly that point, and there were a lot of OECD officials there picking up on that. And that was one of the major influences on the OECD's thinking about self-evaluation. So why does the OECD think self-evaluation is of key importance. First of all, they believe there's a risk that external evaluation may predominantly be associated with compliance, not improvement. That's the first headline. The second is the essential policy aim to be that school communities are engaged in and own the process of improvement. Absolutely should be the essential policy. If school communities aren't engaged in and own the process of improvement, say goodbye to any long-term sustainable quality. The OECD also cautions against requirements to publish the results of self-evaluation, as this could hinder school development. And there's one snippet that's worth noting before I move on, and that is that, and I remember Shepherd's description of Patton's legislation in '93, and that what she said. She said that England had a unique hard-edged inspection system. How many people remember that phrase? That actually the OECD found that England's inspection system has the broadest range of major or high-weight influences on schools. So according to the OECD, Ofsted has a significant impact on school performance, school administration, the evaluation of individual teachers, support for improving teacher skills, and the potential for school closure. I now want to turn very briefly to what really contributes to the highest performance in individual countries. And this is not about cherry picking. I always found, actually, when people say, oh, we ought to be like Finland, or we ought to be like Singapore, I get it. But there are lessons that can be learned, actually. I think that's the important thing. So in Singapore, and I've got a bit of time for Singapore, I have to say. I was out there, I did the rapporteur role for the International Summit of the Teaching Profession out there. I mean, whatever you think of Lee Kuan Yew, and I'm edgy about Singapore being a benign corporate state, but if you're there and you've been chucked out of the Malaysian education, out of the Malaysian governance system, and all you have is a small island where there's some fishermen, what do you focus on? And that is, you recognise that it's the brains of the people who are there that you've got to invest in. Lee Kuan Yew did that. Put a huge amount of money and resources into education and consistently has done so. So I do have a bit of time. We always argue that about education, that it's about not only social cohesion, but economic development, and you put it into education to achieve it, and I've got a lot of time. So let's see how it relates to teachers. Well, teachers actually receive stipends during training, and only those that go to research universities can apply. They get 100 hours a year of government financed professional learning a year, and all teachers will be trained, for example, in the use of AI in 2006 onwards. So they're all focusing on that. The curriculum is based on desired outcomes for education. Schools carry out annual school self-evaluations, are responsible for their improvement plans. Ministry-led teams of evaluators evaluate schools every 6 years. As consultants, they are respected educators, school leaders and university professors. So the people who evaluate schools are the people who actually do the job. And these teams, their role is to validate self-evaluation. They validate self-evaluation and not looking at anything else. It's how well have you done your own evaluation. They provide feedback to schools and offer support for improvement. Schools cooperate in clusters to implement their improvement plans, and there are outstanding achievement awards for schools. Controversial, maybe. Estonia is another high performer, and they require 5-year master's degrees for teacher training. 1% of teachers' salaries are set aside for teacher learning. There are no regular inspections of all schools, but they are required to conduct self-evaluations every 3 years. I say Estonia because they were right at the top of the league in 2018. The ministry oversees sample-based inspections on specific themes. Schools are required to create school development plans based on their own self-evaluations, and schools must engage school communities, including teachers and students, in outlining goals and improvement strategies. Comparative data is used to support effective self-evaluation. Japan, teacher recruitment is highly selective. They're required to have degrees, but they also have rigorous school board evaluations. Teachers have to take exams before being hired. The implementation of these exams for teachers is overseen by a prefectural board of education. Teachers must change schools every few years and they are required to work in a sports school at least once in their career. Teachers who are deemed to be high performing are encouraged to work in low performing schools. The observations of teachers focus on suggested areas of, that's our external observations of teachers focus on suggesting areas for professional learning. But there are examinations of Year 6 and Year 9 students across all schools in order to monitor their progress. So schools are inspected by a municipal and prefectural board of education supervisors based on a framework for school self-evaluation. And it is a requirement that teachers' own evaluations be part of the school self-evaluation progress. So teachers' own evaluations have to be included in the overall self-evaluation of the school. And then my old fave, Finland. And I know that Finland crashed in PISA in 2022, went down from 3 to 17. There's a discussion about why that happened, incidentally, but we go on that naming questions. So Finland has a highly selected graduate training programme. Applicants, again, have to have master's degrees. 1 in 10 applicants make it to primary teacher training. 40% of subject teacher applications in secondary make it. And there's university teacher trainers are required to be active teachers and practicing teachers. Municipalities and schools develop their own curricula informed by national guidelines. There's no central school evaluation inspection. Finland's Education Evaluation Centre conducts thematic evaluations. Teachers and principals employed as centre staff carry out school evaluations if you are asked to. Municipalities pay for centre evaluations if they think it's necessary. So what is the conclusion? And I'm going to come back to Kevin and Blanket, actually, because I was saying to Alan, actually, at lunchtime, I was asked to do a biog of Blanket. And the thing that blew me away after 20 years and brooding on secretaries of state is he is the only Secretary of State who genuinely believed in standards, not structures. Actually, he was not interested, it was only after that, in the second iteration of New Labour from 2001 onward, that actually the whole issue of academies and everything came up with Andrew Adonis, etc., etc. In the first 4 years, it was a focus on the strategies, National College for School Leadership, General Teaching Council, professional development, all those were the focus. Now, you can have all sorts of discussions about the way in which they were imposed. Did they piss off teachers, etc., etc.? But what you can't take away from Blanket was that actually he thought that was far more important than actually big restructuring of the types of schools. He never, ever touched that. And I think that was a golden period, actually, in education. And I believe now there are mature teachers who are still feeding off what they learn through the strategies in the first year from 97 to 2001. My conclusion is that it's practical teacher policies which lead to overall high levels of student achievement, not external evaluation for accountability. It's about ensuring high entry standards for teacher training, consistent professional learning and school self-evaluation, which fully involves the school community, which leads to high levels. They hit the button. Now, I'm using that on the evidence I get from the OECD. This is not me just pulling it out of the word or an emotional response. This is the evidence from other countries. There is no evidence of school inspections focusing on accountability themselves contribute to high-performing schools. In fact, as the OECD says, external high-stakes evaluations lead to compliance, not improvement. In short, when it comes to creating a system where all schools are getting the best out of their students, it's not inspections which are crucial, but teachers. And or to adapt, as I shall conclude, to adapt Bill Clinton's immortal phrase, it's teachers, stupid. So there you go.